because that's just more specific, right? Not all the scientists are seeking better ways. So that's something I want you to pay attention to. Like there are many ways to jump the ideas. So think about the options, right? Like which one would be a better way? Like so different method, like different sentence structure will affect the meaning as well. Modifier is also like a sort of logical relationship as well. And question 11. The answer will be B. That's cause effect. And B has a conjunction, has the subject and the verb. So usually that would be a better option because it just have that subject and verb relationship. It's very clear, the meaning. And the other question 4 here. Also, we just use because it's her favorite offer. That would be fine. Ignorance is not equivalent to stupidity, right? Because for ignorance can often be corrected. So that's a conjunction for. Do we have better option? Stupidity, because it can be corrected and the other cannot. What do you think? Which one will be better, A or C? Why? Because the it here, right? The other here, which one? Which one? Are you talking about Lawrence or stupidity? What's how to say that word? Oh, okay. So can we have that answer? A answer. So that's something we didn't talk about, but that's something I want you to focus on as well, like the pronoun reference. So we talk about the pronoun antecedent agreement, but there's also another rule regarding the pronoun reference, which might not be included on the SAT anymore, the digital SAT, but when you see that in the choices, so that's something you also need to take into account. What does that 8 refer to? Does it have a clear, unmistakable antecedent in the context, reference in the context? Is that clear? And do we have a better option? And this one, that's known for, which one shall we choose? We cannot use however, right? That's not a conjunction. So the answer will be D. Known for something. That's the idiom. Known for something. 24 here. We have but, we wouldn't use since. So A is wrong. So 24, the answer is A. And 14. Which one shall we choose? Which one shall we choose? For question 14, what's the answer? D. Is it D? Right. So that's a sentence structure, like the city is populated by many people. That's the main clause. Who? Although their common language is English, that's that's the non-essential elements, right? Also dependent clause, but in the non-essential elements. So start from the who here. That's the adjective clause. So who speak language at home? That range from, right? So that is the verb. We need a verb here for the subject who, which modify the many people. So the answer will be D. Only D has the subject. Have the verb for the who, not E. We don't need that they here. So be careful about sentence structure. Identify the right sentence structure from where to where. So the sentence boundary. Question 1. Because they believe that. The answer will be C. They here is clear from the context. It refers to people. Right, so that's fine. We have because after we have a subject and verb, that's a clause. Clause is better than the phrase. Usually, like in this, especially in this case, like because of doing something. Who believe that, right? Because of believing that, who believe that? So with the subject here, the meaning will be clear, much clearer here. Now we know the subject of that verb, believing. And this one, the answer will be just C. So accomplish that. So accomplish that. So that's the idiom. And this one, when, right? We use when here. When is also a conjunction. And the meaning here, when indicate in the meantime. Yeah, that's correct. Right. So that's the best way to combine these two ideas. And then like question 14. Which one shall we choose? Shall we choose B? Can we choose B or A? Can we choose A? What's the difference between B and A?
Back to which.
That and which. Is there a difference? There's also a comma. So what difference would that cause? Or with a comma, without a comma, that's a sign of what?
The non-essential.
Non-essential, right? So if you have a comma at the end of a sentence, that's also non-essential. But is that the major difference between A and B? That's something we talk about. We probably need to talk about today as well. Like it's something called the adjective clause, right? We talk about that many times actually, but think about the problem with the A and B here. They're both wrong. But why they're both wrong? The which and that here, do we have a reference? Do we have a clear reference on the context? Which can last for several days. That actually refers to what? What can last for several days?
Contamination.
Contamination, right? But is that a noun in the thing clause? So it's sort of like modify the ocean, right? The noun before is just the ocean. So the meaning is wrong and the structure is wrong. So we're missing the antecedent for the which or that. So which one has that contamination? It's the answer. So A, B, C actually have a similar problem. Like C is more wrong because the it can last for several days. That's another independent clause. That's a run-on sentence. But it's sort of all missing the antecedent for the pronoun. So which and that, they are also pronoun. They are called a relative pronoun. So it will also require an antecedent here. So the D answer would be or. Okay, so how about D or E? Can last for several days. While the contamination can last several days. E. Why? So reasoning, right? Again, think. You need to come up with your own answer, and then you can, like I mentioned before, you need to be able to support your answer. So you can, no matter what answer you have, you still need to be able to think and get to the conclusion. So that's very important here. So for example, like here in D and A, right? Why do you think A will be a better answer?
Because I think it's clear. And if you use while, it will be kind of confusing.
What does while mean? Right? What's the meaning of while? It could happen in the same time, right? When, right? Or There's another meaning of while as well.
Like while something can happen, other things can happen too. Like
Or it's similar to I do something while you do something. It's like comparison, right? It's like whereas. So it's a small, like a subtle contrast as well. Subtle contrast as well. You think you're right, while I think you're wrong. Right. So that's also like a very typical usage of while. It's similar to whereas. So sometimes they are interchangeable. But do they work here? For these two ideas, did they have this kind of like happen in the same time or contrast logic in the context?
no.
No, we don't have that, right? So we shouldn't insert that unnecessary and inappropriate conjunction, rather than we'll probably just rather just take it away and just put a semicolon. It's just two ideas. The first one saying that like that's what happened, and the second one saying that's what happened after, sort of like, and then like or a second idea, the contamination can last for several days. So and with the for here, that's probably that's the idiom as well. So the A answer would be a better answer, better option. But sometimes you will only have a very small difference, like the detail difference, but you have to think about, you have to just identify the difference here. Like any literal wording makes sense, right? So we have to justify that, like, oh, while do I need that while here? Or should I just use a semicolon? So that's the key. Based on the things that we talk about and other questions that we have down, you will have a better idea. So sometimes people think like, oh, I'm not sure, but I just make a guess. But if you have done a lot of this kind of practice, it can guess better. It's higher, you have a higher chance to guess the correct answer because they're thinking in the same way as how SAT does. Question 20, we did that in class. The answer will be B, right? So this is another tricky one. Be careful about that word signal and just signal. That's different. So after that, we have a prepositional phrase rather than a clause. How about, oh, we did that one as well. It's A, right? How about this one? Question 35. Yeah, we did that one. We did this one as well. Oh, have we done all this? All right, good. That's good. How about this one? We haven't done this one? Yes, we did that one. All right. Yeah, let's have a. Yeah, what's the answer for this one? However, right? That's a contrast. And this one, nevertheless. 是 usage of nevertheless here. No, so regardless of that, supporting the word right here. So usually you wouldn't give you two choices like however and where, nevertheless. So they were all just very different. So you just choose the contrast logic here. That will be fine. And this one, what's the answer for this one? Let's just say contrast again, right? Contrast logic again. I cannot use however, that's not a conjunction. But is a conjunction. So that's another thing besides the meaning, right? But and however, even they are very similar in terms of meaning, but they are different types of words. So you have to use the right one here. How about this one? 20. Hmm? Something. Just change that to something that has never done before. What is that? What is A? That become a noun phrase. Right, it's just something, and then like that has never done before. Like that's an adjective clause, modify that something. This kind of noun phrase. Is that correct? It is correct. It is called the absolute phrase. Absolute phrase. There's some other like knowledge point that we probably would talk about as well, because even they're not like a major testing point, but you sometimes will see this kind of sentence structure or the phrases in the choices. So you need to be able to recognize that and understand the usage of this kind of phrases or clauses. So the absolute phrase, that is one of them. So the form of absolute phrase, I give you the name first, like the absolute phrase, but we talk about that in detail today. We'll talk about that in detail. So it's a noun with a modifier, and it is a noun phrase. So usually we say that that's the appositive phrase, but it's not the appositive phrase of the noun before it, but somehow it is modifying, not describe, like it's explaining the whole independent clause, the whole idea before. So that is called the absolute phrase. So it is sort of like a noun phrase that is the appositive of the whole clause, rather than just the appositive of noun phrase. It's not like Natalie, my teacher, but the noun phrase here is absolute phrase, more independent. It's sort of like explain, or even you can say modify the whole clause, the whole idea. That is correct. So the answer is A. So there is no verb here, then that's fine, because that's not a clause, it's just a phrase. And this one, what's the answer? 143, what's the answer? You can only be right by doing something, and then that is the phrase, and we just modify the subject here after. Correct. All right, good. So that's the modifier. That's the transition words question. Today we are going to talk about like I mentioned, like some other things. The first one is the adjective clause. So we're going to talk about the adjective clause today. What is adjective clause? Adjective clause basically is a dependent clause. We have heard of that many times, and we have introduced that to you already, but now we just summarize the rules that related to adjective clause and testing point that related to adjective clause. The first one, adjective clause, is, hey, notes, I don't have a handout for today, but like for this one, but I probably organize one later, but you can take some notes here. So regarding the adjective clause, let me see if I have the handout. So you can look at the examples here. So here we have some examples, the adjective clause. And can you identify from where to where is the adjective clause, and what's the structure of the adjective clause? Right. So which meets on Thursday? That's an adjective clause. And it modify the noun before it. the class. And the second one, who won't help with calculus? That's another adjective clause. And it also modify the noun before students. Number 3, who? Number 4, that I must take. This is the examination that I must take. Not the 4th one, actually. Let me get rid of that. That's not an adjective clause. Smith wrote the poem that won first place. That we have an adjective clause here. And also the last one, I first saw him in Paris, where I lived in the early 60s, where that's also like an adjective clause, introduce an adjective clause. So from these examples, you can probably see we have 2 types of adjective clause. You have 2 ways to write an adjective clause. You can either use relative pronoun. This is the relative pronoun. That, which, who, whom, or even whose. So remember the one that we saw before, like the which and that. So they're all relative pronoun. They can be used, they are pronoun, and they used to introduce the adjective clause. In the adjective clause, so you can see here, since it is a pronoun, right? It play a role in that adjective clause. Does it make sense? What kind of role does it play? Who won't help with calculus? Subject, right? So it can be the subject in the adjective clause. So the adjective clause has subject, have verb as well, but it cannot stand alone as a sentence. Why? Because it starts with who, rather than the students. Even though it refers to the students, but that is a relative pronoun. So that is by itself, that's just a dependent clause again. And why it is called relative pronoun? Because it relates to another part in the main clause, and it somehow can link the relative clause to the main clause. So that's called the relative pronoun. So there are 2 ways to introduce a dependent clause. Now think about that, right? Or 3 ways. We can use a subordinator, because unless subordinator to introduce a dependent clause, but we can also use a relative pronoun to introduce a dependent clause, or a relative adverb to introduce a dependent clause as well. So that's the example of relative clause of the relative pronoun. That as well. Another one is different. Another one is relative adverb. Which one is relative adverb? Where here? That is an adverb. What does that mean? We just look at that for example. You can see in this adjective clause, I live where, right? It's like I live where? In the early 60s. And where here is actually just, what's the function of where in this adjective clause? It's a pronoun. It's an adverb, right? It's not a pronoun, it is an adverb. I live where I live. I live where. So that's relative pronoun. It's just a modifier in the adjective clause. So that's the major difference between which and where. They are definitely not interchangeable, because which is a pronoun, where is an adverb. They are different parts of speech. They have different parts of speech, right? So which means that they play different roles in a sentence. But they can both to use to introduce an adjective clause function. Right? So for the adjective clause, we place next to a noun, the antecedent is also called the antecedent, and modify the noun as an adjective. So we call it an adjective clause. So think about the function of this adjective clause here. It is just that adjective clause and it modify Paris. That information modified the noun before it, which is the Paris, like an adjective. But that's called the adjective clause. So you definitely use that every day as well. But now you can use them more confidently. So with that knowledge, we look into the other things. We don't have a handout yet, so we just take notes together like now here. But I might probably just organize one. All right. Yep. So let me see. I have one, but I want this like have all the yeah, I'll probably send that later. So pay attention, notes taking, and then like, so let's look into the things that is important. The first thing, right? We can look at the relative pronoun. The first thing you need to pay attention to is the difference between which and who. They're both relative pronoun, right? But they're different, right? We use which to refer to non-human. Basically anything except human. When we use who to refer to just human. But another one is the that. So that can actually can be interchanged with which or who in most of the cases. Like and there's no difference. It's not like, oh, who would be better than that, or which would be better than that. No, it's just the same. Like we can use that refers to either human or non-human. But there are some differences, right? In some scenario, some cases you can only use which, not that. We'll talk about that later. But at this stage, you just need to know that like we use whom to describe people, we use which to describe things, and whose and that they can both refer to things and people. Even whose can refer to things as well. It's just the possessive case of which. For example, like the playground, right? Whose facilities and which attested. So whose here is the playgrounds. It's the same. It's just like refers to the playgrounds. It's the possessive case of playgrounds. So that's where when you use whose, the girl whose assignment always receive the highest score in class. Right, so that will be possessive case as well. So think about difference between who and whose. Now you know how to use whose. And which and who. So what's the difference between which and who? Make sure that the pronoun who, which, and that refers to the right types of nouns. Who, which is typically like sometimes they use which to write incorrectly, refer to people, and who refers to things. That would be wrong. It's not used to refer things. So that's something to be careful. How about animals? Do we use who or which to refer to the animals? What do you think? Have you ever thought about that? If it's just like a normal, like not like unnamed animals, right? Like a species, we just use which or that. Because again, they're not human. But if it's a famous animals or a named pets, right? For example, your pet have a name, you can use who because Again, that's not an animal anymore, that's your family. So that's the rule here as well. Like use which to for inanimate objects and unnamed animals. But maybe the better option would be just use that. Right, because that can refer to the animals, of course. All right. Let's take a look at the question 15. Which one? B, right? Change that to who, correct, right? Students, not which. So that's very wrong. And now I can explain why it is wrong. We should change that to who. So that's this kind of mistake. It's easier to identify, right? It's sort of like the antecedent pronoun antecedent agreement as well. But now it's not about an agreement in number, but it's agreement in type. So which refers to a noun human and who refers to human. Another difference is also like just for your information as well, the difference between who and whom. Who and whom, they both refers to a human, but whom is the objective case of who. So when would you use whom? Depends on in this adjective clause, the whom, when whom is the object of a verb or a preposition, we use whom. And if it's the subject, we just use who. This is a very good, like this is like very simple sentence for you to understand this concept. So the girls who likes me, because who is the subject, right? So we use who. The girls whom I like, why would I have to use whom here? Because I like the girl. That's the object in that adjective clause, so we use whom. So sometimes you might see sentence like the students or two people, both of whom are my best friends, right? You have to say both of whom, not both of who, because of here is the preposition. After the preposition, we have to use the objective case of the pronoun between you and I or between you and me. It's always between you and me, because between is the preposition and after the preposition is the object. So it's always between you and me. I do this for him, right? Not I do this for he. I do this for you and me. So that's the preposition rule. It's related to the pronoun case. So that's for information as well. Like just remember that like after the preposition, you always use the objective case of a pronoun, because prepositional phrase, we talk about that like it's a preposition plus a noun or pronoun. The noun and pronoun, they are the object of that preposition. Does that make sense? Anyway, so that's just something I just want to think about. Like, so remember that between you and me, and always between you and me, not between you and I. That would be wrong, actually. Okay. This one. Question 16. What's the answer for this one? Both of whom, right? So now can you explain why it should be both of whom? Why we need to use whom here? Right, again, because it's both of. So after the of, we don't have the choice like both of who, but if there is a choice like both of who, you cannot choose that one. Can I use both of that? You cannot. because if you have the preposition, you can only use who or which. You cannot use that. But C and D are both wrong, right? Because they are like run-on, of which both, that's definitely not right. It's referring to the dancer. Okay. So the next one here. Question 12.
What?
What? Yes. So how do we fix that one? Can we use what? We don't use what, right, to introduce the adjective clause because what is not the same as which. So what we use is just the, we can change that to which, and that will be correct. Okay, the next one. The next one, they are the relative adverb. So besides the adjective clause, we can, besides the relative pronoun, we can also use relative adverb. So we talk about where. Besides where, we also have when, why, and whereby. What is whereby? Sorry. Be careful about where. So all this relative. So first, you need to know the meaning of whereby, because it was tested many times actually. So you need to know the meaning of whereby, and the usage of whereby as well. So firstly, you need to know that like all these relative adverb, they actually can be replaced by, is they the same as a preposition plus the relative pronoun. For example, like where is the same as in which. So sometimes in the choices, you might not see where, but you see in which. You need to know the difference between in which and which. Why we need that preposition? Or by which. What is by which? So whereby is just the same as by which. So let's look at a sentence here, right? So that now like we can, once we know the relative adverb, there's another thing you need to be careful is the difference between where or in which versus which. So the difference between in which and which, that depends on what. So what's the difference here? Firstly, I mentioned before, right? We just focus on where and whereby. Because where is an adverb. So the biggest difference here is where is an adverb. Even the in which is also an adverb. Right? Think about in which is a prepositional phrase. A prepositional phrase can function as an adjective or adverb. Right? So it can function as an adverb. So that's the difference here. So so where is the same as in which. So the difference between in which and which is whether in the sentence in the adjective clause. So remember this, that depends on in the adjective clause, do I need a pronoun or do I need an adverb? What does that mean? Have a look at this one. The house where I was born, or which I was born, or in which I was born. Why should be in which? Because it's I was born in the house. All right, I was born in this hospital. I was born in the house. So that was, we cannot just say I was born in the house. That doesn't make sense. So we need that preposition, right? You can see that like, so in the adjective clause, we need that preposition here. So we, in order to sort of like can think that like in order to put that house back to that sentence, if we want to fit that house, the antecedent to the adjective clause, I need a preposition here. But if I just say like the house which I like, can I just use which I like? Or do I need to say in which I like or where I like? It should be just I like the house, right? So whether I should use in which or which, the question depends on in the adjective clause, do I need that in or not? Does that make sense? So step by step now think about whether I need that. Should I use in which or which? It's not about the things before, right? Sometimes people get confused thinking oversimplify the things. It's just like, oh, because of the house is the location, so we should use where. But right, for the second one, it's also the house. How to explain that? And also sometimes the sentence can get a little bit more complicated and more complex. Then you need to think about, again, the key here is in the adjective clause. Do I need that preposition or not? Do I need a preposition or not? All right. Think about this too, right? Just use these two, like the house in which I was born, the house which I like. So in the adjective clause, you cannot just say which I was born. Because which is the same as the house, right? It's like I was born in the house, so we need that in. But here, the house which I like, just I like the house, that will be fine. So it's just an object in that preposition, in that adjective clause. So I don't need that preposition. So I can just say I like which. Whereby is the same as by which. So just remember that whereby is the same as by which. We can use whereby to modify. Usually we use whereby to modify like a system, a process. What? So for example here, a system whereby people could vote by telephone. What does that mean? It's just the same as a system by which people could vote by telephone. Right? So here, the whereby here, like you can see the meaning or so sometimes when you see the whereby, just remember that like that's the same as by which. So people could vote by telephone. So people could vote by telephone by the system. So by the system or by the system, people could vote by telephone. So that's the meaning of by whereby. Does that make sense? So for the rather pronoun, it basically just need to remember two. One is where, the other one is whereby. And where is the same as in which, and whereby is the same as by which. The other two is why and when, but they are like easier to understand. Usually we just use when to modify time. It's the same as during which. And why is the sort of similar to for which, but we usually just use why to modify the reason. So that's the only way that how we use why. So the reason why our experiment failed. That's the only way to use why. So that would not be tested very often. Yeah. So the sentence structure will be the reason why somebody does something is that. That's a very the very common sentence structure. So now, all right, another so there's two examples. Can you tell me that right, are they all correct? Melbourne is the city where I live, in which I live. Is that correct? In which or where? All correct, right? Because where is the same as in which. I live, why we need that in? Because again, so I live in Melbourne. I cannot say I live Melbourne, right? But if I change that to Melbourne is the city which I like, that's fine, right? Because I like Melbourne. I do not need that in here. We probably can see that like the key, should I need which or in which, it's not depends on the things before. It's not the city, it's a place. No, it depends on the adjective clause. Do I need that preposition in or not? Do I need a preposition? Sometimes it's not in, sometimes it's the other preposition, but do I need a preposition? All right, let's look at the question 19. Now we have a question here. The answer. Why?
Because it shouldn't be which. Because in front of us in those cities. So it should be like where.
Why? In those cities, I need where? Why should be in which?
Because it's in the cities that public transportation is adequate.
Right, it's in the adjective clause. I need that in. It's not because in those. Okay, but hold on. But already in those cities, I already have the in here. Do I still need an in after? Yes, I do, right? Because the first in, that's in the main clause. So in those cities, fewer traffic problems occurred and pedestrians are rarely involved in accident. That's the main clause. Now I have an adjective clause to modify the city. So what kind of cities, right? In those cities, which cities? In this adjective clause, I still need the in because that would be, I need to say that like in which, in those cities, which here only refers to those cities, right? It would not include the in. So if I need another in the adjective clause, I need to give it its own preposition. So that would be, that adjective clause now makes sense. It's like in the cities, in those cities, public transportation is adequate. Does that make sense? So without the in, the adjective clause would just be those cities, public transportation is adequate. That doesn't make sense. We don't need a noun in the adjective clause, right? Public transportation, another thing to think about that is public transportation, that is already a complete sentence. If we want to fit in that those cities, I want to fit that which in the sentence, I need to change that into an adverb, a modifier. So like in the cities, in those cities, public transportation is adequate. So I need that adverb. I need an adverb here. So I can either use where public transportation is adequate or in which. But I want you to really remember, think about the usage of in which, because most of the case, when you look at the choices, they would not, you would not see where, you only see in which, and then which. And then you still need to know the difference here. And then even they give you another one like for which, for example, right? Then you can, so that depends on which preposition, right, will be a best choice here, according to the context. It's not for the city, so it should be in the city. So it will be in which. Look at that again, right? Why in this sentence we definitely need that in here? It's not because it sounds correct, but why? We can explain why that in is a must. Even without the in, it might sound correct as well, right? So that's very not reliable. So it still is, go back to the grammar note, the analysis, rational analysis here. Just remember that like in whether do we need that in or not depends on in the adjective clause, do I need that preposition or not, right? So this is the one questions. This is another one, question 21. This one. A, how do we fix that?
You change that to in which or where.
Why?
Because that doesn't.
Why we need that in?
Because we have a chain, which is like a verb, and then it's like if you have in which, it will be like, you know, like the world, and then change itself. So it's like an independent.
Which we should look at which part. The dependent clause start from where to where? The adjective clause here start from where to where? In a world that the rate of something, right, accelerates frighteningly.
Like if you have that, there's no subject.
Right?
No, I mean like before, like it says in a world,
Mm.
and then it says change right after.
Change. Which one is the verb in the main clause?
So the main clause is like in a world.
Change itself.
Or the world.
Things is the verb. Right. Change itself often seems to be the only constant. So the main clause is, let me zoom out a little bit. I know it's small. Yeah, change itself is the only consequence. That's the subject and verb in the main clause. But the problem here is again like so that's still an adjective clause, right? I call it like if you get rid of the that wouldn't make sense because we will have two independent clauses in that case. So the sentence structure will be, so what's the sentence structure? It's in a world and then like change itself often seems to be the only constant. So change here is the subject, seems is the verb. They are the main clause. And here, from here to here, again, what kind of world, right? What kind of world here? That's the adjective clause. So that, is that correct? Or should we change that to where or in which? And why? That depends on what? That depends on in the adjective clause here. Do I need that in or not? Right? That only refers to a world. So can I say a world, the rate of technological and social change accelerates? Or should I say in a world? Right? I need that preposition. So I need to use in which here. So again, it's in which, and then we have subject and verb. And so in which here is just an adverb. It's just a modifier in this adjective clause. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? So think about, again, the difference here is the question will be asking you is we have more practice actually. So really think about now like how to do this kind of question. Firstly, you need to identify the question, right? The question here will be that is the same as which. All right. Firstly, you need to recognize that that's an adjective clause. So here the question would be, firstly, can I use that here to refer to the world? Yes, that's fine. As long as you're not using who, right? That will be fine. But now we need to think about the second thing, right? So in the adjective clause here, should I use that, which, or where, or in which? Do I need that preposition? So that depends on what? In the adjective clause here, do I need a pronoun or do I need an adverb? If in the adjective clause, it already have subject, verb, object, right? It has everything. Then I probably would not need a pronoun. I need a modifier. So like a preposition, phrase. And depends on the antecedent here is the world. So I will be in the world. The rate of something accelerates. So the preposition here will be in, not other, not for, not as, not on. Right, so not by. But if it's modifying a process, right, I would say that, oh, if it's talking about a process, and after that, I also have subject and verb, everything like the process, something, right? People could vote by phone. That also already contained the subject and verb, everything, right? If I want to fit in that process to that sentence, can I say the process people could vote by phone? Obviously, that doesn't make sense, right? So I definitely need to put that process inside the prepositional phrase. So that become a modifier. So I would say by the process, people could vote by phone. So I will use by which or whereby. Does that make sense? So it really, that's a harder one. So that's a harder question because it's not about very simple which or who. It depends on the adjective clause. Inside the adjective clause, do I need that preposition or not? So just, all right, we'll skip this one. Let's have a look at the other questions. So this is a question. If you look at the choices, that's a question you might see on the asset, like the digital one as well. So if you look at the choices, you can straight away, you probably will identify the problem. It's easier for you to identify the problem here. Right? When you look at the choices, right, you see the where, you will see the which. Why?
Because it refers to the visitor center.
And why we should use where, right, rather than which?
Because you're describing the place, kind of.
Which can also refer to the center. Why we definitely need that in where here, like in which? We don't need a pronoun. We don't need a pronoun in the adjective clause, right? So she brings the past of life. So in the adjective clause, if I want to fit in that which, the visitor center to that sentence, I have to say what?
In the visitor center.
In the visitor center, she brings the past to life. So that's why we need that where. Because in the adjective clause, I need that preposition in. So saying if I have not, the answer is not where, but in which, you know why we should use in which here, why we need that in. Because it's in the center, she brings past to life. So does it make sense? Think about it. So that's what I mentioned, like whether we use in which or which depends on in the adjective clause, do I need that preposition? Or I just need a pronoun, right? Sometimes if we're missing the subject or something, we need a pronoun, then the subject will be which. So it could still refers to the visitor center, but if we rewrite the adjective clause into something like the visitor center, which ensure her, right? Then that will be the subject, and then I will just use which, not in which. Here's another one. 34. Is it D? Is it D? You all agree that should be D. And why? Can you explain confidently here for this one? Why we should be whereby?
Because it's a practice and like you have to the products are designed by the practice and not like from the practice.
Or at the practice, right? So that's another thing you need to consider here. Whereby is the same as by which. So that's the difference between A and B and D. So the point preposition here, right? According to the practice, we know that like it should be by the practice, not at the practice. So that's something you also need to you need to know about whereby, and then like what you should look at this one. So if you change to a different antecedent, maybe at would be right preposition, right? So it all depends on the context. But now you know the question, what the question is asking. So what you should look for, what you should check, what you should focus on. All right, it's inside is inside the adjective clause. Do I need that preposition, and which preposition I should use? And just pick the right one. Okay. So hopefully, so now that you have the knowledge, that's the knowledge, right? So the question can be different, right? The sentence can be come into different forms, types, but that's the method. All right. So now we know the hardest thing, like the difference between which and in which. Make sure you can get that correct. You know how to get that one correct. We talk about difference between then and which. Only in adjective clause. Only in adjective clause. So which means that like that can be used to introduce other type of clause. And in the other form, other type of clause, the rules here will not apply. So the first one is that is never preceded by a comma. So if you want to put the adjective clause as non-essential, you never use that. You have to change that to which or who, but not that. For example, like sentence like this one, the movie that opened or which opened last Friday. If it's part of the main clause, you can either which, that, or fine. But if you put this middle part if you put the adjective clause as non-essential, then you can only use which. All right. So that's the first difference. Now it's like comma. But only in adjective clause, again, only in adjective clause. Rule number 2. In adjective clause and also only in adjective clause, we use preposition. If we have preposition, then we can only use which, not who. So we talk about in which, right? At which, by which, not in that. But again, only in adjective clause. So if you look at this sentence, right now we see if I can identify here, it should be that's an adjective clause after, during something, during which, and modify the shift. You can explain why it should be during, right? Because it's like, it could be like during the demographic shift. Then you will know A is wrong, because if that's the adjective clause, it would be during which. So B is wrong as well, because it would be in which. C is wrong because a comma after that, like at least you should use which. But of course, you should also use during which, not just that. So we only have the D answer. Does that make sense? So if you can remember the rule here, like actually you can also see the problem straight away in the other choices. But D is correct, right? Why? Because we don't put a comma here to separate the demographic shift and the things after. The whole thing, if it's very long, that is the definition, a noun phrase to explain the Great Migration. Rather than the Great Migration, like rather than historical graphic shift, it's a non-essential. Does that make sense? So if I give you two choices here, right, for the A answer, I change that to which. Can you justify A or D? Which one will be a better answer here? And what's the difference? With the comma and without a comma? What's the difference? Do you know the question? What's the difference? Without a comma here. So this one is with comma, right? The other one is without comma. What's the difference here? Which one should I choose? A or D? How to justify? How to explain?
D.
Why?
This is most like the non-essential.
Which part is not essential?
The historic demographic to like African Americans and including Laura's sister. So those are the main clause. The series recounts the story of the Great Migration. Like the root.
Right. So yeah, that's something you can think about, right? So which part should be the non-essential? So that's the difference between A and D. If it's A, which part is non-essential? If it's A, if we put a comma here.
Is it the historic demographic shift?
Yeah, right. Is that like, so if I put a middle part as non-essential? And then like the during that now or during which?
Doesn't that make it the series recounts the series of the Great Migration during that makes
During which?
during which more than 6 million African Americans.
So sort of make that part now directly describe the Great Migration. And then like the historic demographic shift become the non-essential. Right, so if we put a comma here. But without a comma, that might adjective clause modify the demographic shift. And together, that is the non-essential as a definition to the Great Migration. Does it make sense? So that's the difference between these two, with comma and without comma. And then you can justify here according to the context, right? The Great Migration, the series recount the stories of Great Migration. And then we have an explanation to that Great Migration, or like a definition to that Great Migration. What is that Great Migration? A historical demographic shift during which more than 6 million African American, including the people will feel that like the demographic shift together with the adjective clause, that should be one thing. Right, that should be one thing together. And as an explanation to as a positive phrase to the Great Migration. The answer here is so you can sort of see why the answer is definitely the best answer. But I just want to use also, I want to be more sensitive to the non-essential elements like the comma, without comma, and you can justify here the difference, and based on the context, right? At least you know the difference between A and D. And you can justify based on the context that you have. So should this part be together, or should this part just by itself as a non-essential, and the adjective clause should directly modify the noun before it, right? And part of the main clause, right? So that's the things that you need to think about. Probably not. Probably here, like the subject is still the series. It's the series about an artwork. We don't have enough context here, but that's the article is talking about like the art pieces, a series of art pieces. So they tell you that the art pieces recount the story of the Great Migration. So the real definition of like that during that's important. It's just like give you, so this can be part of like the demographic shift rather than in the main clause. But how about this one? London differs from other cities such as Paris and New York. In that,
Because you can't have a preposition with
good that you, well, we think about something that we talk about, but be careful about this one. Is this an adjective clause? So think,
so B.
what's wrong with B?
Actually, no, never mind.
Yep. So is that C here an adjective clause? Why it is not an adjective clause? If it's an adjective clause, it should modify the noun before, right? The cities. It is modifying what?
London.
It should modify London, right? But London is it so another rule for the adjective clause, right? It modifies the noun right next to it.
It can't modify.
It cannot modify the subject. It cannot modify London here. If it's modifying the London, it should come right after London. So London, which or where, and then like differs from other city, and then we have the verb, right, and everything else. So according to the meaning, so it can only modify New York, Paris, or other cities because they are the noun right next to it. But does that make sense? Is that the meaning here? Is that the other cities, shopping areas are so widely spread out? No, it's the London's shopping areas so widely spread out. So we can see here, oh, hold on. It looks like an adjective clause, but it is not an adjective clause. What kind of sentence it is? Yeah, it is just a prepositional phrase. Yeah, it's just like London differs from other cities in something. Here, that is a conjunction and introduce a noun clause. So it's just a noun clause. So be careful about the usage of that. So I emphasize that like these rules only apply to the adjective clause because that can be just a conjunction and introduce a dependent clause, a noun clause. All right. The next one, so be careful about that with comma and without comma. Sorry, with that, with the in that can be other things as well. Question 33.
See?
Why?
Because it is, you need that preposition.
Because it's in the atmosphere, right? Expectations are high and opportunities good. So you can see that like, yeah, we need that in. So the answer must be C, not D. So when you look at the choices, you should be able to identify the question, right? And then like you should know now, all right, so that depends on, do I need that in the adjective clause? So you can follow the steps, right, to find the right answer. confidently, step by step, and not be, because you cannot use that. You can only use which in this case. So the answer must be C. So this is another one, right? So attitude clause is also very common. You can common things on the ICT as well. So make sure you identify that. How about question 43? Why?
Because it's like hypoxia relieves pain by a separate mechanism.
Correct, right? So again, in the adjective clause, we need that preposition. And out of this A and B, right, definitely should be by. And we cannot use the because we need that preposition. So you know what the question is asking. Right now you look at that sentence. All right, that's good. So think about the adjective clause that we talk about. So mainly it's about whether, like, firstly, it's the easier one, like who or which, right? That kind of question, that's easy, and definitely not what. But the harder one, the harder type question types will be, sure, do I need that preposition or not? So the difference between the relative adverb and relative pronoun, but actually the key here is the preposition, because sometimes you look at the choices, right? Don't have where, and they even ask you which preposition you should use. So that is something you really need to think about, is in the preposition, in the adjective clause, do I need that preposition, and which preposition will be the best answer. All right, have a look at some questions here, like question 31. You can just check the sentence first. Just read that sentence from the start to the end. Read the whole sentence. What do you think? Which one we should choose? To indicate.
Okay.
Indicate. Okay, identify the question type. So for this type of questions, right, if you look at the choices here, indicate, to indicate, indicated, indicating. So firstly, to indicate and indicating, they're not a verb. And indicate, indicated, they are the verb. Or at least indicated must be the verb. Or it could be the verb. It could be past participle phrase as well, but it could be the verb. So the question is about verb form and sentence structure. Do I need a verb here? Can I put a verb here? So this question is a bit tricky. So let's analyze the sentence structure here. So you shouldn't feel very confident, right? Because maybe you haven't found the key of this question yet, but this is a tricky one. Let's have a look at the question together. So what can you do if you encounter a question like that? Can you find a way out? Can you help yourself? So focus on the sentence structure.
Would it be a symbol that historians believe?
And then?
Believe indicated.
Why should be indicated?
I don't know.
Or should we just indicate? Right, so which one would be correct? Or indicating? Right, they all sound similar. So what's the reason? Again, right, we can only depends on the logical analysis. Firstly, the main clause. Which one is the main clause? At the fork of two rivers near the settlement was a rest stop. What's the subject and verb relationship for the first one? That must be a main clause, right? You can see, you should be able to see that. Which one is the subject?
Let's start.
A rest stop. That's an inverted sentence. Right? Remember the inverted sentence? So not the fork or not the river, not the settlement, because they are all prepositional phrase. And then we have the verb, and that's the sign of a preposition, like inverted sentence. So the subject will be a rest stop outlined in blue was at the fork of two rivers near the settlement. So once we identify the subject and the main clause, after that we have what? A symbol. That is a noun phrase or a noun. Refers to the rest stop. So that is a typical a positive phrase, right? A noun phrase placed right next to it, and a noun give you more information to the noun before. We have seen that many times already, right? The migration, vertebrate migration. After that, we have like historical demographic shift, and then like a very long adjective clause describe that demographic shift. So, but we have historians believe, and then like something. So after that, we have what? Historians believe. What is that? What is that? That's a subject and verb relationship again, right? Why we can have subject and verb here after a noun? And it's not underlined, so that must be correct. So here is actually...
Because is it technically supposed to be a fact between the symbol and historians?
What is that?
The relative pronoun.
The relative pronoun, yep. So it's actually an adjective clause without the relative pronoun. When you can omit the relative pronoun. So you can omit the relative pronoun when in the adjective clause, the relative pronoun is not a subject. So you can say the person I like, right? It's like the person that I like, but you can omit that. The question I ask, it's not like two independent clauses here, or this is a question I ask. No, it's like this is a question which I ask. So sometimes that's make a question like sentence look so strange or so a bit weird if essay intentionally, purposefully to design a question in this way. But you need to be able to recognize that, like, hold on, do I have an adjective clause here? But without the which. The sign here is after that, we also have another subject and verb relationship. So that would be which, a symbol which historians believe. Now think about that indicate. Which one we should use? That bit depends on what. Historians believe the symbol indicated. Why should be indicated? Because that's past tense. So because indicate here is actually the verb. So it's the sentence structure will be a symbol, which, so the two things are missing here. One is the which, the relative pronoun. The other one is the that. So actually the historians believe that. And then we have another independent clause, like another dependent clause after, like the symbol indicated a secret fault. It will not be A because the tense is wrong and singular plural, that will be wrong. And it would not be B or D because that's not a phrase here. It's a harder one, right? Because the sentence structure is a bit hidden, unclear. But when you look at that again, you see that like the sentence structure is actually like the symbol which historians believe that, right, indicated. So the symbol here is in this objective clause. So it's not a subject of the historians. And another thing here, what if I change that sentence a little bit as well again, right? What if but that would be wrong. If I change that, if I put that comma here and comma here, how would that be correct? Yeah, think about that. If I put a comma here and comma here, which one shall we choose? Which one should which can we choose one out of these four?
Would be a symbol that indicated.
Do we have the choice?
Oh, wait, I did choose between one first. Okay, never mind. Would it be D?
Why?
I don't know.
Have to think, have to answer that question now. You cannot say I don't know anymore.
Oh.
Why? Because that's something we talked about already. Firstly, if I put two commas here, non-essential, right? So I make that. So you need to understand my intention here, why I put two commas here, why I design the question in this way, why I actually present a question like that to you.
You put like that, then make it into like that.
I can put that, right? But I cannot omit the relative pronoun here anymore. I cannot just choose the C here. Why?
It's not
Because even that's adjective clause, that's still an adjective clause, but now like I cannot omit that because that would be the subject in the adjective clause now. Right? So which indicated, which historian believes indicated. So that would be the subject. If it's a subject, I cannot omit that. I cannot omit that or which. So I cannot use adjective clause here because I cannot change the first part, but I can change that into a modifier. So indicating here, that would be a present participle phrase and directly modifying the symbol, right? A symbol indicating a secret fault. So that would be fine. And then like the historians believe that's just a non-essential. I just ignore that. I don't need to worry about that. Does that make sense? Why not to indicate? What's the difference between to do and doing? To do is also active, right? To do. This is the rule to do something. This is like this is the rules to say something. This is the rule stating what can be do, what cannot be done. What's the difference between these two? So when you say doing, right, it's more like it's just describing the current status of something. So it's just like that's what it is doing now here. The symbol is indicating something. But when you say to indicate, that has a connotation of something that is tend to do in the future. I haven't been now, but to be. So one of the typical way to use to do as a modifier is like somebody to be recognized as the world champion began the amateur game, like he began playing tennis as an amateur player when she was 14. So that's like to be recognized as the world champion here. It's just talking about something going to happen in the future. In that context, because the context is talking about when she was 14, right? It's talking about that. So that's a typical of to do something. So it's more about either like about the to do something is up to do, or have a nominal to do, or like the purpose. But here it's just describing the symbol, right? The symbol's there, like always there, like this what the symbol's doing at that time, right? The current status, and so indicating that's the best choice here. So these details are also very important. And then like again, we want to outperform the other average students. So you need to make sure that like you can, all these questions like are all within your range, right? You can explain them because that's still based on something that we already know. We have already known. It's not like particularly something new. But that sentence structure is a bit hard, so I put it here and explain to you why the answer is C here. So just be careful about sometimes the subject, like the adjective clause, might not have the relative pronoun, but it could still be an adjective clause, like this one. All right. This one. What's the answer for this one? Easy one, right? This is an easy one. Definitely not B. Must be D. So yeah, just be careful. That's also tested sometimes. All right. Usually we say that when we have an adjective clause, we make sure that like the which has a clear reference, or the that, right, at like a pronoun like has a clear reference, refers to a noun before and modified noun before. But there's one time we have a question like this one, question 4 here. What's the answer for this one? If you look at the choices. The plastic hardens quickly. Right. Out of the 4 choices, which one you can choose?
C.
All in C. The other one, they all like run on. Right. But which here refers to what?
Plastic.
It cannot refer to the subject, right?
The hardening process.
It's all refer to the idea, the whole idea, the main clause, right? The plastic hardens quickly, which allows the printer to So this kind of like whole idea, this feature of the plastic. So that's just one question I want to show you that like, even we emphasize the antecedent, right? You make sure like the adjective clause has a clear reference and a clear antecedent, so we know what that modifier describing. But this is a very short sentence. So we can probably justify here. All right, so that's, you can also use which here. Another important reason is like we don't have any other better choice here. So yeah, I would just go for the C answer, which. But that's just one time, and you can see here like it's a very short. So that's something that like you can also use which to refer to a very short idea from the context. It's very clear from the context. But normally we will require that like you you have a clear reference. So like a reference as well. You have a like the modifier logic, right? You have a clear idea, like a clear modifier relationship. I know what that adjective clause is modifying. All right, so that's the adjective clause. So that's a sort of like a knowledge point, but you can see there's other questions related to that as well. So make sure you now like have that knowledge. And then we talk about the absolute phrase that we just mentioned. So you can, that's another hard knowledge point. So you just be able to recognize these things, and maybe you can try to use that in your writing as well. What is absolute phrase? Absolute phrase is a phrase. Firstly, it's a phrase. And what kind of phrase it is? It is a noun phrase. So remember we talk about a phrase, we say that like, oh, the different type of phrase, and one of them is a noun phrase. So absolute phrase is one of the noun phrase. Another type of noun phrase, also a very common one, is a positive phrase. Right, so but the difference between a positive phrase and an absolute phrase, they're very similar when it comes to the form. For the absolute phrase, it has a noun or a pronoun plus its own modifier. So remember that sentence like that's something that no one has done before. So it's actually like a pronoun, something, plus its own modifier that no one has ever done before. That's an adjective clause, so like a modifier as well. So the modifier could be participles, could be prepositions, could be infinitives, and even adjective clause. They're all just modifier. So the function of this kind of noun phrase, right? They are strong. They are like the opposition, but of the whole main clause. So you wouldn't be able to find a noun or noun phrase before that absolute phrase. It's not refers to a specific noun. It's actually sort of like refers to the whole idea. So somehow it gives you like allow us to add details to an independent clause. So sort of like make you feel that like it's modifying the whole main clause. For example, right? So if you look at some examples here, why that's important? That's something you need to know, because sometimes that absolute phrase will make the sentence looks a bit strange. But now you need to know that like that is correct. You need to be able to recognize this absolute phrase, and you need to be able to analyze that, like why that sentence is correct. Let's try one of this question. This one, have a look at this one. What's your answer? And a thick growth of sunflowers standing 10 feet tall. Their brown heads drooped over the fence with the weight of their seeds. Is that A answer grammatically correct?
There's two different tenses.
So something be careful here. Do we have two verbs here?
Oh, no.
So what's the sentence structure of this one? What's the first part?
Is it D?
Why D?
Because it's like an independent clause, and then it's like an absolute phrase after that.
Can you see that? Which one is the absolute phrase? Why it is an absolute phrase?
Their brown heads drooping.
Their brown heads drooping. So the brown heads is the noun. Drooping here, that's the modifier, right, of the brown heads. So that is a form of an absolute phrase. Why not A?
Because that's not like a standalone sentence. because you don't have a verb.
So how about the A? Look at the A. Which part is the independent clause? So what's the difference between A and D?
The A, the independent clause is their brown heads drooped.
Would that work grammatically? So for the A, right, can you see that like the first part now is the absolute phrase? What is an absolute phrase? So pay attention to the things that we talk about. A noun or pronoun plus a modifier. So here, the sunflowers, a thick growth of sunflowers, standing 10 feet tall, right? So it's like a noun or noun phrase plus a modifier, standing. So standing here is not a verb, it's the present participle phrase that modified the flowers. So that could be an absolute phrase. So before, like probably when you see that, it's like, what is that? Is that a sentence fragment, right? Because it doesn't have the verb. Standing is not a verb, so that's wrong. Or the tense, or run-on sentence, because you don't have a conjunction here. But now you should be able to recognize this more advanced grammar device. That is not a clause, it's actually a phrase. And what type of phrase it is, what type of function does it play in a sentence, right? It's the absolute phrase. And it can add information. It can modify the whole sentence. So you don't need to worry about that. Like, oh, it's a noun phrase, but what's the appositive of this one? Is that a positive phrase? You don't need to worry about that anymore. It's just like another way to think about, to understand this kind of like absolute phrase. You can think about it's a modifier with its own logical subject. So it's like standing 10 feet tall, right? If we just look at the modifier, we usually, when we see the modifier, the first question we need to think about is like, what does it modify? Does it have a target? But now we don't need to worry about that anymore because it already contains its own target. So it becomes more independent. So it's like a more independent modifier. So we say that like it can place it anywhere in the sentence. It can place it at the start of the sentence. You can put it at the very rarely in the middle of the sentence, even at the end, also at the end of the sentence. And you don't need to worry about the modifier relationship because it just modified the whole thing. But the difference here of A and D, now what's the difference? They're both grammatically correct. So what's the difference here? Right, think about like based on what we have talked about the SAT, right? The essential, non-essential, all these things. There must be a reason why they put it here. Which one should be the main clause? Right, so that's something you should think about. Which one should be the main clause? Which one should be less important, like a modifier? So for sunflowers, right? So the two things here. Firstly, just common sense, right? You think about the sunflowers, right? So the sunflowers stand 10 feet tall, still 10 feet tall, and then like their brown hair dripping. So the second part actually should be the modifier, right? And also the their brown hairs, the pronoun here, also give you some extra hint. Or that should be probably that depend like the non-essential rather than the main clause. So the answer is D. So you need to be able to again like think about what is required for this question. And can you process that out? Right. So that's something into again like you need to we need to think about like and the non-essential element like the it's sort of like non-essential elements as well. So it's always the hard questions, right? At the end when you go to the level like that level, you will see the SAT questions like the hard questions are always a mixture of something, everything. So you have to be able to have the ability and habit to check everything. So meaning, grammar, logic, everything. So that's the absolute phrase again, right? It's sort of like it cannot stand alone, but still it cannot stand alone because that's not a clause, right? It doesn't have the verb. You definitely need to make sure that like, right, the rest of the sentence have that subject-verb relationship. Otherwise, that's all wrong. And it's just sort of like can proceed, follow, or interrupt the main clause. So for example, like this one. So now be sensitive to this kind of like absolute phrase. The hunters rested for a moment in front of the shack. Their breaths white in the frosty air. So when you see that, like their breaths, that's a noun. Or white in the frosty air, that's the adjective. That's a modifier. So that is an absolute phrase. And it just modify the whole sentence. Give you more information to the whole sentence. So get familiar with this more advanced grammar device. Absolute phrase. So you can put that even in the middle of the sentence as well. So don't take it as a mistake. Another thing to be careful is don't take it as a mistake. Have a look at this one. Can only be D, right? Why?
Because like the second part is already the absolute phrase, and then so you have to have like a verb in the underlying part to make it make sense. So and then D is the only option with was.
Correct, right? So that's the complete reason here. That's his plain explanation. So here we have the subject verb in the main clause. She being an outdoor enthusiastic and he a dedicated bookworm. Again, it's strange, but there's nothing wrong because again, that's absolute phrase. The second thing is omitted. Why? Because you don't need to repeat that. So you are allowed to omit the repeated part in a parallel structure. So that's another thing you need to understand why there is no being here. Because yeah, you are allowed to omit that. Here is another one. Which one? B. Are you sure? Or E? Why? There's something to think about, right? For the D answer, the bat's looking for mosquito. That's fine. Well, mosquito would look for. Do you think that's the best way to say that idea? Two ideas, to join these two ideas. The second one now become would do something. Right? Past, future tense. So that's a lot of things you need to check. And also like the first one is a absolute phrase, but the second one become a dependent clause. Or should they be parallel? So which one? A answer, right? The bats to look for mosquitoes and the mosquitoes to look for people. To do something that is an infinitive phrase, that is also a modifier. So why E answer is the best answer? It's like bats and mosquitoes come out at twilight. So that's a present tense, general facts. And after that, we have two parallel phrases. They're both absolute phrase and parallel them. Everything's parallel. the structure is parallel, right? And here as a coordinator, they join these two absolute phrases together, so they're equally important as well. So that's what the answer that usually that's a standard for correct answer, right? Think about what we mentioned before, like the correct answer in the end, it would be correct, clear, consistent, and concise. Correct, grammatically everything correct, tense is correct, no problem at all. Clear, pronoun reference, for example, think about a clear, like it has a very clear logical relationship as well, meaning it's clear. The correct including the meaning as well. Consistent, the tense is about consistent actually. So think about like if all using present tense or past tense in the context, consistency, and pronoun agreement, that's pronoun antecedent agreement, that's about a consistency. Subject verb agreement, that's also about a consistency. And then like the concise, so wordiness, right? So any redundant repetition words, repetitive words, which just get rid of, unnecessary words, which just get rid of. So if everything's fine, everything is the same, with just the shortest one, the shorter the better. So that's concise. So we, like at this stage, probably just you can sort of like think about like that's the ultimate principles, ultimate principles. Okay. Have a look at this one. Would you choose D?
Yes.
Why? Why not A?
Because like you don't need while.
Mm-hmm.
It's like parallel
And D correct? And is D correct? So why D? Why like? So what's the structure of D here?
it's like the actual clause, right? Complement to intersperse. And then you have a absolute phrase. And then another one.
So here, right? So if we see the sentence structure here, you will probably see that we have two absolute phrases. Usually we remember the bats to look for mosquito and the mosquito to look for the bats. We can put an and here, but we don't have that choices. Can we use while? If that's the case, we probably wouldn't put a comma before the while. Right, so that's a subordinate rules. Still, you don't put a comma before that. And we don't need that as well. We can also just like use a comma. So that's something tell you that like you can use commas to separate two noun, like these kinds of like absolute phrases. You can put a you can use a conjunction to join them, but you can also use a comma. You don't have to give a conjunction. Does that make sense? So think about what you can learn from this sentence here, these questions here. But you cannot use be, right? You cannot use semicolon. Just mainly to think about why you don't need that while. That's something you learned from this one. There's many ways to say that. You can say like they disperse, like some running, others walking. Right? That's basically the sentence structure of the original sentence. That's fine. Or you can say like they disperse, some running and others working. That's also fine. Or you can say they disperse column, some run while others work. So change the second one into a dependent, like another clause, another independent clause, and to explain the first one. All right. How about this one, question 41? Think, again, think. the thought process, thinking, make the difference actually. Again, do you have a very good process, like action plan now? So for example, when you see a question like that, what would you focus on? What's the answer? You will have less than 1 minute to answer this question. Would you choose A? Have you come up with your own answer? With your own, like, right, with your own reasoning process? Can you see the answer here? Who would choose A? Okay. Who would choose B? Who would choose C? So what's your answer? No, you don't have answer here? Nina, what's your answer?
I know.
But at least you have some thoughts. Do you have some thoughts about this one?
I mean, maybe A. Is it? So think about the difference between the choices, right? So that's what you should focus on. Look at the choices here. What's the major difference between these choices? And that's the key. Identify a difference and then justify here. Which one should we choose? And then you will feel confident. Can you explain your decision? And would you feel confident? So why A, not C? Yeah, share your thoughts. What's your, yeah, but Anna, why you choose A? What's your reasoning here? Because it's like concise and also it like doesn't really like, because for B you repeat solar power a lot, but technically B is like a similar structure to A. And then
what's the difference between C answer and an A answer? What's the key difference? So B is wrong, right? Like we focus on the shortest one first. So probably A, C, and D. What's the biggest difference between A, C, and D?
the semicolon.
Yes, semicolon is one.
Such
Yes. What else?
development competitions thing.
Yeah. Are they the same?
Because I was confused, like, is it talking about referring to a competition or is it referring
Yeah, I
to
was
development?
confused what it meant by
Because
how like competition would lead to utility companies and private homeowners to use solar power.
I thought because it's like solar power is now competitive, so it's like the development that it's now competitive, like the fact that it's now competitive is leading to like people to use it.
Oh, okay.
Right. So that's something you think about, right? You have to firstly identify the problem, and then that would trigger you to think. So that would like a train of thoughts, right? So, okay, hold on. What's the difference between, so B is wrong because that's basically the same thing as talking about A, and aspect of solar power. What is that aspect? It's very vague. It's unclear. It's wordy. So get rid of the B first. So that's a reasoning process, right? Again, based on what we have learned about the SAT. We know SAT want concise answer, clear answer. So B answer is definitely not good. At least it's not as good as A. And then like the C answer. So the difference here is like C answer here, change the subject to a different wording, competition. So that definitely will catch my attention as well. Why? What I mean, is it development or competition? So that's another thing. I think we're more major than just the semicolon or the sentence structure, but that's also another thing. Like here, C answer, the second one is sort of like another independent clause, but A, that is absolute phrase, right? So it's like development and then like the adjective clause. But I will focus on the development competition here because the answer also have like the competition. So I want to see like at least whether that's which one would be a better way to express that meaning. The solar power is now competitive with other energy source in many markets. So the competitive here, right? What does that really mean? It means that like, right, they have a competition, or it's just saying that price getting lower and lower, right? But of course, if you have more context, it's easier for you to get the idea. But you probably can see why the C answer and D answer have that competition, because as they want to trick you. They want you to focus on, oh, the competitive, so it must be a competition. So we probably should say, but actually it's not a competition. It's just a development. The development of the price, the power is competitive with other energy. So that's just like, yeah, that's just like a development. So we see that like that makes sense. It's like a solar power is now, so previously, right, solar power probably was expensive or something, or not accessible, but now like it's competitive with other energy sources in many markets. And this development that has led many companies to use it. So that's the A answer. The answer will be A. So everything will be reasonable. So it will not be just some arbitrary decision or some, right, like some very random decision that like, oh, the answer must be C because SAT says so. No, it will be just still like based on the logic here. There's always a difference here, but we need to be able to analyze and just, so you sort of have that kind of habit. You always want to find that reason why until you feel, yeah, that must be the reason. That's the difference here. I can convince myself. I find explanation. All right. So in the end, when you're doing the questions, like this is all like a problem solving. You're all solving these puzzles, right? It's like you have a question and then like you just based on all the information in that questions to find the best answer out of that 4 choices. So that's how you play the game. And the good thing is all these games, all these puzzles are designed by the same group of people. So they all follow the same logic. They all have the same standard and same requirements. So there's a pattern there. Maybe the questions will be different, like sometimes harder, easier, and you will see something new. All right, even I prepare everything like almost 99%, but you still have a chance to see something that you haven't seen before. But if you're very familiar with this game, you still need to, you can see that like, all right, out of its 4 choices, which one is more likely to be the correct answer? Which ones are definitely out? So you have a higher chance to get to the right answer for every single question. All right. In the end, you want to get 0 mistakes. That's the only purpose. Like no matter what's your target score, you want to get 0 mistakes. For the question that you can answer correctly, for the question that within your ability. So think about the questions that like, is that really that hard that I cannot do it? If it's beyond ability, then your next task is like just to improve. Of course, you need to improve your ability, but if it's within your ability, then your task is like, how can I answer that correctly every single time? All right. So that's for the absolute phrase. All right. That's very good. We have made a great progress here today. All right. So that's for today. We didn't have the break, so we just almost finished now. Like I wouldn't start another things, but the homework for you to do. I will send you the handout for the adjective clause. Oh. Okay, yeah, so they do some job. So the handout, so there's some other questions in the handout, so you can do those as well. Or you can just redo some of the questions, see if you can easily, right, analyze by yourself. Again, it's not about the answer, right? Even you can choose the right answer if you cannot explain thoroughly, confidently, correctly. You should just assume that like, oh, I'm just lucky. I just guessed the correct answer. All right. Yeah. So I have to push you to do extra work because yeah, that's important. That's a must. So we want to do that. And we are going to maybe have a test tomorrow. That's my plan. Have a little test but only the grammar. We're not doing the reading, so only the grammar. But we will talk about something else as well. And then we have a little test. We will have a little test. So sort of like the end of like holiday, right? So we have holiday program. So we have a little test, and then we will next term, like term 1, we move on to the reading. Do you feel confident you can get 0 mistakes in the grammar now? No. Will not be that many. So you will see tomorrow.
Like 40 or like 30 or like 60 or like
Oh, it wouldn't be that many. It wouldn't be that many. It wouldn't be that many. So like it's just a little test. So just to
like 100.
no, of course not.
The usual SAT grammar session.
For the current one, yeah, for the paper-based one, yes. So it's like 35 minutes. So we try one. We tried I'm still thinking, should we choose I'll probably use the paper-based one. So the writing sessions. So have a try like before we move on to the digital one. Have a try of the current paper-based SAT and see if we can do better than the mock. But they have more than they have more than just grammar questions. But those questions are right, like not that hard. So but I will more focus on the grammar part. All right, so we will do that tomorrow. But at the end of the class. So don't get panicked, just do your best. But review something, right? Especially the practice that I sent you already. And I haven't sent you the answer yet. So I will send you the answer so you can check the answers by yourself. And definitely make the practice. See if you can do better than your mock, or even get 0 mistakes. See if you can get 0 mistakes. Or how far you're away from the 0 mistakes. All right. See you tomorrow then. Right. Bye-bye. I have the right course.
Oh yeah, I did really bad.
I made like 17 mistakes.